All right, so let's do a quick check-in, just for the sake of it. uh, yeah, let's share a little bit from you, Caro, because there's going to be some relevance as to these French people moving to Spain and then moving to Thailand, where the inner dance is now happening in a cross-cultural, cross-climactic, meaning climate space. So how are you doing there?
I'm doing great. It's been like hello everyone, I'm Caro. Sorry. I'm jumping into the sharing. It's been like almost 2 weeks that we're here and we are acclimatizing like very well. It was quite intense to come here and also to leave Spain. I've been living in Spain like for 9 years with my husband. We were doing our activities, and actually I did like I was thinking I was reading my yellow. All of this is really yellow for me since like months now. For me, like it means like change and action, and also like really like moving forward, moving forward. And actually I felt like I don't know, Spain was over for me somehow. So my body was like more like in resonance with something else, like more in Asia. So we decided like to move and to settle like this in Asia. So many people told us like, yeah, are you crazy? You are living everything like in Europe. And we say, no, no, we just feel it. It's really good.
Mm.
And I feel a lot of energy, like moving, like a lot of so of new project or opportunities for my husband or for me also. So it's really exciting to be here and to be in
Mm.
this other part of my inner dance also now in Asia. So I'm really looking forward also to come to Philippines finally and come to see you guys, come to visit you. And yeah, let's see what we have. I'm really in this space of transition. That's why I was mentioning the yellow. It's really like the space of balancing things out after like an intense like inner dance of 4 years with different waves. And I feel like now it's really a new chapter, so it's going to be really interesting. So now we are in a house like for 6 months, and then we will have to change to find something like more like stable for 1 year or 2 years. So slowly we are like
Mm.
attuning to the vibration here. And I will start the lesson of Thai language like starting from next month. So this is gonna be
Mm.
also interesting. So
Mm.
yes.
All right, amazing. Um, okay, so I want to welcome you guys to green. Let's first define what is green, what is in the green when we study within that domain. Like it's generally the heart space. In the curriculum, when we open it up, what do we find there? All right, so let's go to the website for now, so we can look at the outline. And a lot of you probably might not have understood some aspects of the colors or the mandala. Um, but I hope it starts to make sense for you. Like we always go to the green, or often, sorry, we often go to the green because of this section, which is the history of the inner dance playlisting process, which is historicity. But what's interesting is when you climb up here, there are these somewhat mysterious topics like hermeneutics, all of these new terms that might not be so familiar to people. I want to go into the next two calls casually across what these mean. Um, But let's simplify and just do some note taking for now. All right. Um, there's going to be two main aspects, one of which is the culture. You might say the culture within the communities, the culture inside the people who are laying down. Where does culture fit in? So I would say we've been going a lot into the neurological, the psychological, the linguistic. Culture would be the anthropology in the study. There has to be some measure that we bring in as to the role culture plays. And what is culture anyway? It's like it pertains to groups of people that pass on meanings, that pass on symbols, rituals that are shared between those individuals. The other thing in the green, we would initially brand it as hermeneutics. But if we were to define this expensive term, what we're really looking at is what is meaning. How do we construct meaning? Meaning, how do we make meaning? How do we make things meaningful? How are we meaning making machines? How are we meaning making organisms? And that's just the beginning. When you send out your information, your messages, this would be received. So in hermeneutics and in structuralism, this is more called the process of signifying, the process of signification. So whatever meanings are made, when that's received, people would make that meaning theirs. So more or less, hermeneutics is in fact more the science or philosophy of interpretation. How does interpretation work? Okay? How do we interpret something to be what it is? Okay? How do we interpret something to be good or bad, to be right or wrong, to be high or low? And who is to say, right? So I would say hermeneutics is a branch of philosophy, but it's also an emergent property in the consciousness that's finding a point of origin, right? We've been discussing in the colors how there are ways in which people would arrive at the simple, the basic, the pure, the baby state. And when that evolves or grows um, beyond the phenomenological, there's the epistemological, there's the structural. Hermeneutics is an important stage where we start to develop a critical thinking process. Hermeneutics, thus, is possibly the starting point for critical thought. Like, at what point do you start to think for yourself? So you can imagine, without a system of interpretation, without clarifying how does interpretation take place in the psychological and the neurological and even the linguistic, especially now with social media, with the digital technology that people carry in their pockets, in their bags, because of the World Wide Web and because people are traveling all across the world. I would feel we still lack a coherent system of interpretation. In many ways, hermeneutics is still on its way forward. So I would love to discuss the role of hermeneutics in the spiritual awakening process. So as we start to understand, okay, we can clarify the mind, meaning we can make clear. And I would love to focus on that word today. Like, what does it mean to feel clear? Because it's one thing to feel clear by emptying, but because of the world's complex nature, you have to live in the world. You have to speak to people. You have to be with people. There are so many layers of judgment existing within ourselves. Another word, the word that's more relevant in hermeneutics is we hold a lot of prejudices and preconceptions. Like when we look at anyone or anything, is it actually possible to clearly see them in an empty space, but also in a full space, like in an objective space? How do we deal with our own prejudices? And hermeneutics, in a way, holds that study. What is the role of prejudice? So that's the green, basically. This is the main outline for green. And this is the heart space. Without these discussions, I don't feel the colors would be able to arrive at integration and a feeling that there's this completion happening. So I want to focus more today on this. And in the second call, I would love to go deeper into this. There has to be culturality. And for those of you who have been holding spaces, and we would define more or less what does it mean to hold space within the space of culture, a lot of you guys are holding many, many bodies, many types of bodies. And what I ask you, is there a difference between bodies? You can describe them as bodies of color, bodies of directionality. For example, bodies from the east, bodies from the west, and bodies from the global south, bodies from the global north. Question is it the same inner dance process, or are there differences? As an example, just looking at the people in this call, when you look at this particular space, for example, when I hold spaces for people from Canada, there is no such thing as a one Canada. There is the French Canadian, and then there's the English speaking Canadian. And when I hold space for either of these, it's not the same. It's the same as in when I hold space for Asian Chinese. The inner dances that I hold are very, very differently orientated with the Chinese and the English speaking Chinese. When I hold space for Americans, there is a huge differentiation between Americans coming from the north and Americans coming from the south, right? So the anthropology is very, very interesting, primarily because there are translations happening between these different areas. Like Belgium is a huge space in Europe that's conducting inner dance, and there's a huge difference between the French side of Belgium and the Flemish side, and then the German side. So we're not here to create a racism. We're not here to create a sustained prejudice as to bodies. Like, we want to universalize the bodies, but at the same time, we have to be honest and clear about the fact that there are transformations. There's a bridge work. There's a bridging the gap. So we're not interested in the difference. We're actually interested in the space in between. So, for example, in the body of Carol, who I just shared, coming from her French, English, Spanish-speaking Europeanness, when she studies the language of the Thai people, I would observe from an inner dance perspective, because we are interested in the structure of consciousness, what is going to be happening to her own brain as she studies a Southeast Asian language, even as she's exposed to the climate. Thailand is the biggest Buddhist country by population in the world. So moving from very Catholicized places, what would that religious difference be? You know, when she talks about Palawan, it might be the same climate, but she's talking about the biggest Catholic Asian country in the world. So there are interesting processes there that when we start to apply that to the inner dance mode, there are avenues regarding space, like how do you approach that space differently as opposed to time? And then when you translate that into brain processes and even like linguistic ones, how do you begin to speak to all of these spaces? Is it all the same or are there differences? We would look for a starting point to look at the what culture can teach us, then how we can go beyond what we are observing through a deconstruction, not a destruction, but a close reading that allows us to, in fact, hack culture. What is the structure of culture from an energetic point of view? And how do we apply that, for example, to a playlisting process? Would that be interesting for you? How do you playlist culture? They do say beyond culture, it means that we are at the precipice of contributing to culture that transcends the old, the current, that which we know. We are opening the space for like the unknown. And then I think this could also be interesting in terms of the energy cultures that we are seeing emerging across the world, the Kundalini, inner dance, yoga, Tantra, whatever cultures. There are new cultures emerging, reflected in social media, reflecting inside these very, very intimate gatherings where people are journeying from within. How do we read between the lines? Because there are many things spoken and unspoken within the energy cultures. So providing you a kind of map that allows you to navigate that would be helpful. So you can contribute to the, let's say, to the transformation, the healing, in a way that's not, like combative, adversarial. We're not here to make fights or wars between differences. We're here to see where these things start to conjoin with each other. So this is the map. Sorry, let me just open my phone because I have some notes. This is the map, and I hope you are excited about this. Like I find this to be, in fact, very, very important. And I will be honest, I don't always have the space to talk about this in the trainings. It's not easy to create space for these because these are not so seemingly relevant to people, but I feel they could be, in fact, the most relevant, depending on where we're speaking from. Okay, so let's start with the concept of clarity. I have been hoping to help people coming into the spaces to feel clear. Okay, that's one of my goals. Like I would wish that people feel clear. And when I receive emails from people sometimes who attend trainings, who not necessarily inner dance trainings, but other trainings and so on and so forth, this is an issue and it belongs to the type of work that we do. So it's natural that we don't always feel clear because the nature of the work that we do, in fact, makes things unclear. Wallace Stevens, an important poet and philosopher in his own right, has this really interesting, beautiful quote that I, admire. He says, "The role of art and inner dance, in a way, is a kind of art form, if it's not a science. the role of art is to make the visible hard to see. And when I came across this, I realized, okay, that defines the work that you do. I was trying to remember this quote by the Little Prince, uh, who stated that it is what is essential is invisible to the eye. It is only with the heart that one can see wisely. What is essential is invisible to the eye. So there's something about the laying down experience and the closing of the eyes that allows us to see by making invisible what is visible. So in other words, we have to, in fact, make unclear what seems clear so that a deeper clarity would come about. So we have to be very compassionate with this unclearness that will perpetually be in the space, especially as a lot of people who are holding these very direct questions are coming from a transition point. Okay, going back to say these directionalities, there are sections of the world where unclarity is the clear, and we want to define what that means, as opposed to other sections of the world where being clear is being clear. Like in some sections in the world, to be unclear is actually to be clear. When you're too clear, you become unclear. That may not make sense, especially now because the East and the West, the South and the North are now in a transition phase, translating into each other. So in the East and in the global South, uh, often what is said is not what is meant. I'm going to say that again. What is said is not actually what people mean. I'm going to say another statement that supports that. Let me write that down. In the East and in the South, often what people say it is not what they mean. And what is not said is often what is meant, as opposed to the West and the global North. What is said is what is meant. And when people don't say it, they don't mean it. Okay, so that's a starting point in terms of the differentiations in the culturality of people and energy and community. So we will see how the inner dance and the work allows these two to speak to each other. And we would study the role of verbal and nonverbal communication and see how that could apply. Let's have a conversation later. Let's be interested in collaborating on how this could mean and not mean interesting things that even I have barely thought about, because this runs deep. And right now there is a confusion because people are saying a lot of things, but there are nuances in what they're saying that's not always in congruence or correspondence. Okay, a lot of you are probably running through your bodies and your brains. Okay, this could be interesting. I am experiencing some confusion where I'm reading some people's writings and I'm hearing people's words, but there's always something deeper. So you're borrowing an Eastern global Southern experience, and inner dance holds the Southeast. Okay, I'm streaming in from Southeast Asia. Actually, I'm leaving today. I'm leaving Palawan and the Philippines. We're traveling to Vietnam tonight. And that's a lot more southeastern than the Philippines, which is maybe one of the most westernized places in Asia. So when I streaming from the call for call number 2, it's going to be interesting for me. So Yeah, I'm just signifying what the green is. This is what the green is about. And hermeneutics underneath all that is a formal method for understanding how meanings are constructed in the minds, brains, and bodies, not just of people. When we talk about culture, now we're talking about groups. Okay, how do we sustain this between ourselves, between each other? Um, okay, so starting with that, like the unclear, like just getting interested in that. That's a starting point. Now, a lot of us now are in the study process, and that's a kind of Western North, global North process. That the more you study, or the more you spend time understanding more and more, the time holds an evolutionary or diachronic function, meaning things evolve over time. So the more you spend time, the more you invest your resources, your time, your energy, the more you study, the more things become clear. In the global South and in the East, that's not really the case. Um, Knowledge is conservative, so you go in circles or in loops. In a traditional, in a shamanic, in a tribal, or in a Buddhist way, emptying the mind and not having to think about things. When we study in the West and the global North, there is evolution at work, and by now you probably are changed by the months or the year that you have been spending more time studying uh, studying within the inner dance process. But this is to say that even as you evolve, you are unevolving. Um, there is an involution process along with the evolution process. That's the Eastern and Southern, like happening alongside you're going forward. You're also going backwards. So don't be afraid of the confusion that does arise in the journey space. It's all part of it. Now, let's study the role of time. We will go into chronemics. It is part of the outline, a huge part of the outline, which is the study of time in relation to language and culture and communication. How do we understand the role of time as it plays an invisible part in people's bodies? So we will make a differentiation between monochronic cultures. Some of you are coming from monochronic cultures. And what are polychronic cultures? Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you have traveled the world. So you are exposed sometimes to, let's say you're also in business and not just a backpacker, spiritual traveler, pilgrim. And then you attended business meetings. So let's say you had to attend a business meeting in Africa, or maybe in Spain, maybe in Mexico, or maybe in the Philippines. So when people say, when we meet, do we meet in African time or Philippine time? That's very, very different from, do we meet in German time or do we meet in American time? Okay, what do you mean when you say let's schedule a meeting? Like what timing do we follow? Um, So what does it mean for you to be working within a specific cultural context? And now this is mixed up. There are a lot of people living in, say, North America that came from polychronic cultures. So here's an example. When the British first colonized Africa, and then when they're trying to set schedules, they had to coin this term African time because people never, ever, 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 ever followed schedules. Okay, I deal a lot with cultures from oral traditions, like tribal people, they don't understand what is a schedule. It's like, what is an outline? What is a schedule? So when you set, in Filipino time, when you set a meeting at 2 o'clock, it means that people will come at 4 or 3 o'clock. So there are then polychronic cultures that live in monochronic spaces. And this is getting mixed up already then. So it's not just about schedules. There's a whole load of orientations in people's minds and bodies that are nuances, that are complexities that probably are mixed up in you. And so what's interesting is there's a lot of monochronic cultures that are changing from within because they're so tired of being so time bound, so scheduled, so chronological, where things are in order. There's now a polychronization of the monochronic in people. So I would say, to put significance to where Caro is speaking from, like, why in the hell would she move from, let's look for the Caro, why would this French woman who's taking advantage of living in Europe along with her husband want to move there? Why? Okay, just seeing the screen, she raised her hand. I'd love to hear from her.
Yes, I wanted to share something because it's totally that. It's like being now in Thailand is like Southeast Asia, and it's right in the middle. It's like an intersection of many cultures. And right now we are on Koh Samui Island, so there are a lot of French people, Russian, also Kopangan, a lot of Israeli and Thai, obviously. And the first projects around the inner dance will be with the Chinese people connected with French people. So Chinese speaking English and Chinese, obviously, and loving like French food. So, so it's really like a melting pot of everything. It's going to be really interesting because they are coming from also like the psychedelic trance like movement and communities. So I'm going to start to mix inner dance with these communities. So it's going to be really interesting. We were talking about that with Bart, my husband, like to maybe create like something together for this kind of gathering. So here is like really like temperature, day and night, only like two grades of difference, like it's like 28 to 30, and day and night are really quite like equal. So it feels like every day is the same days, like it's like it feels like really time being infinite. Everyone is working every day also, and in comparison with Europe, it feels like really like super active. That's what that is what I wanted to say in the introduction. That is really like it's it looked like a full day, like there's not the same day, but I cannot say it's Monday or it's Sunday. It's the same day. It's every day, you know. So as we are also working for ourselves from home, online, and also it means like sometimes we are like, is it Monday? Is it a Thursday? No, it's the same day stretching, and it's really interesting because I don't know, Europe is like really like you just described, like is really timed and really there is a schedule to it. In Spain, for instance, you could have access to the shops in between 1 and 5 in the afternoon because they close the shops. So it's really super different and it's really active. And I just live right now we just live like besides like a Buddhist temple. So I hear like also the chants of the monks every day, so every night. So it's really interesting when the sun is going down. So yeah, thank you.
Definitely, like this is profound that you're able to we're able to look at this through you right now. Okay, let's look at Thailand. It is the only, I'm not sure if it's Asian or Southeast Asian. I'm pretty sure it's the only Southeast Asian country not to have ever experienced colonization. Now, we have to also understand the fact that it is the place in Asia that is the most open to tourism. So when we think about these islands like Kopangan and Koh Samui, and then we bring up Ibiza, we bring up Bali, we bring up these islands in the world where there is the beyond culture. There is a reason why something like inner dance and like the work that we do from Tantra to Kundalini, it explodes in islands like these because they are the when you try to study the people attending the processes, the full moon parties and the journeys, it's not the locals attending. They are coming into the climate, the climate that hosts the slowness, the openness. But the people who are attending the processes are coming from the cold areas of the world, the seasonal, the ones that have winters. So there's a lot of processing happening, historically speaking, and Thailand especially is quite potent to study because it's very hot, and traditionally when it's hot, people are like the word is indolent. That's what the Spanish used to judge the Filipinos. They're like lazy. They're just there. They're not doing anything. They're super duper indolent. They're worth nothing. They're like animals because the Spanish were coming from this culture of the cold where you cannot be lazy. You have to always be running from your prefrontal cortex. Your cortisol levels are supposed to be high. Food doesn't really grow naturally everywhere, and if it does, it only grows certain times of the year. Here we just take things for granted because food is everywhere, 12 months a year. Um, so there's a huge translation at work, and a lot of it has to do with temperature. Like we have to understand, temperature plays a big part in the dream space, states of consciousness, like cold and warm are also rising and falling in the playlist. So I've handled God knows how many trainings and retreats in the Philippines, and I watch these white, like very white bodies that haven't seen sun, pale skins coming here, and then I can see the change taking place slowly. So yeah, that's it. Those are all like relevant. All right, let me go back to the screen. Um, all right, so right now, I think there's a critical point. There's a crisis. Critical can also be etymologically the crisis point. Critical. It's like it's important. It's essential. It's also urgent. There's a critical crisis point. And the one thing we study in the playlisting system that has culturality is fast and slow. Don't know if you're aware of the slow movement that became quite popular like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Right now, there's fast fashion, consumerism, and especially fast food. And then now we have the slow movements. It's called the slow movement, the slow food movement. Um, I think this was quite big in Europe, like in Italy and France and Spain. I think I remember that time they wanted to put up a McDonald's in Rome. He said, no, 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 that's wrong. Don't bring that here. Uh, you know, but not fast food. It's like everything's slow. This is how we are, and we don't want to be colonized by the fastness that's coming from industrialization. So there's a resistance, but a lot of the slow movement, it's coming, in fact, from the fast um, transitions, like city-based places. There is a conscious attempt to slow things down. So I think the crisis point would be how do we slow down the fast? Because people are absorbing so much, like consuming so much, digesting so much, and are overwhelmed with a technological advance? Is it possible to slow things down? So we can see this even in the energy world. There is a fast fooding of the energy. There is an energy industrialization, spiritual industry, people wanting to attend fast trainings, to then be the ones to train super fast. Usually you need to study for decades, if not years, and people are experiencing for days, and then now they want to train people. Now they want to train trainers after experiencing something for months. So there's a fast food culture in terms of branding, in terms of franchising that follows. McDonald's might have started like decades ago. Now they're applying that in terms of so it belongs to the work that we are holding, and you are part of the slow slow energy movement. I would say the more you study, the more you take your time, you're slowing down what energy also can speed up. So we've been studying the brain processes enough, and we will keep studying that over the years. There are parts of the brain that holds speed. We studied the septal area. Okay, something to do with memory. The septal area, the hippocampus has the theta rhythm, if you remember. Just to go into a review, what other parts of the brain establishes rhythm? There is the basal ganglia. Just to understand, there's a neural phronemics, meaning the brain itself holds multiple speeds. And then what else was there? The neocortex also tries to establish the speed that we operate in. The cerebellum also holds speed, and there are parts of the brain that are faster. The neocortex normally is what slows down, and when we study brain waves or neural oscillations, um, that's normally the slower ones. And when we try to think about clear, if you want to be able to think things out clearly, to hold information in a way that it's not like too chaotic, that you're able to organize bits and pieces of information, that's slowing things down. And the theta oscillations of the septal area also holds a key. Beyond the brain, there was also the heart. If you remember the sinoatrial or the SA node is also responsible for pacemaking. The SA node is a pacemaker of the heart. Now, when people study energy, very often what is prominent is the SA node in the basal ganglia. This is where we try to speed up to raise the energy, to raise the vibration. So when you study, the change that you are inputting is happening in the neocortex as well. So you're also learning to think about things and not just to speed up the heartbeat and the addiction pathways that the basal ganglia is, the psychedelic state, the breakthrough state that makes the mind stop thinking altogether, like slowing it down. There's neurological time, and I think it's important that we study that like in the long term. We won't go into that too much today. That belongs in the red, and when we go back to the red in future conversations, we can keep studying that. But I'm glad that we had gone through that in the last calls. Now let's go first into. Let's start with chronemics first. In a past call, we went into proxemics, which is the study of distance or space, like how close or how far must you be when you are holding the space of others. The author of these two studies is an important thinker named Edward Hall. And one of the intellectuals, the most respected intellectuals and deep thinkers that I've worked with, who saw the potentiality of inner dance in the academic space. He actually worked with Edward Hall. He was a he was right there with Edward Hall, and Edward Hall is responsible for mapping out, I would say, time and space and culture, which has many applications in the inner dance. So understanding space is proxemics, and I think that's amazing. That chronemics is the understanding of time. It's coming from the same man. So just to let you know where to research, if you got interested in this, where would you take this further? Uh, okay, so we've established monochronic and polychronic. Let's describe them a little bit, like slowly. The US is one of the first countries that was prominently being studied as a monochronic culture, particularly in the Industrial Revolution. There were sharp notices that what is sacred is the schedule. The schedule in the industrial Americas is sacred. For many people, time is sacred. In the US, it's a schedule, chronological time. Strict timing is sacred. You know, wear your watch, be on time. And when you're not holding that to be prominent, then you're wasting it. You're wasting time. If you're not using time, so Americanism through globalization is hugely responsible for solidifying an understanding of time. That time needs to be very productive and very, very constructive. In many ways, according to John Ivers, for example, a professor of cultural paradigms, monochronic people consume, they eat, they consume time. And in those places, you are supposed to get it done. Get what done? Get the job done. You know, it needs to work. The solution needs to be able to address the problem. And there are places in Europe, there are places in the Americas that are very, very good at getting the job done. Products of colonization, you can see the differences between the countries that were colonized by America and then the countries colonized by Britain. And America was colonized by Britain. British colonies are very, very good at getting the job done. When you think about Australia, Singapore, as opposed to, let's say, the Philippines, Cuba, underneath the US. I don't know if you've ever traveled to some places, and have you ever driven in India? Have you ever driven a car or a motorbike in Nepal or in the Philippines? That is not a monochronic space. We don't follow rules and we don't follow schedules. Okay, so prominent monochronic cultures should be North European cultures, Scandinavian, traditionally like German speaking European nations are some of the most monochronic cultures. As I mentioned, the United States of America, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm married to a North European, particularly from a Scandinavian space. So I understand this quite well. At the same time, there are studies that states that places like Finland, just like Japan, are becoming more and more monochronic. But traditionally, Finland is polychronic. Okay, so in monochronic cultures, tomorrow is more important rather than yesterday. The orientation is almost entirely towards the future rather than the past. And when there are transactions that take place, let's make more space. I'm running out of space. When there are transactions or negotiations, or even just basic communications, there is an anxiety, a level of anxiety that focuses more towards reaching some kind of agreement or consensus, some kind of agenda. Like we need to be clear as to what is the point. I don't have time to chit chat. Like in some of these areas, like I can't really do small talk as opposed to when you go to Spain or Italy or southern France, people will chat with you. But in these monochronic spaces, they're not going to chat with you. It's like, you're wasting my time. Could you just get to the point? You're using too many words. People in these aforementioned spaces are always in a hurry, and they are very problem solving oriented. So that when you mention that there's something wrong, they will automatically go into a formulation as to how they might help solve your problem, and in the quickest time possible, whether it be cancer, depression, or whether it be, there's no dilly-dallying in terms of going deeper into the root cause. You need to fix the symptom as soon as possible because we need to move on. Okay, so this is monochronic chronemics. And a lot of people who go into the inner dance are in fact trying to heal their monochronicity. They might be sick of monochronicity. They're sick of this idea that there's not enough time, that people are always in a hurry. They're dealing with the trauma of there always being a scarcity of time. So a lot of people are laying down, and some of them might be you, might be listening to this. And I'm monochronic. My dad is very monochronic. My ancestors were monochronic, and I need to become more African. So I want to deal with this and move into this situation where there is enough time. Okay. Monochronics are really good at doing things one at a time only, and they have a hard time doing several things at the same time. So now the world, with or without laying down, are experiencing being able to multitask, to cross-conceptualize. Okay, in schools, you study things one at a time, but in the internet, you look at many things all at the same time. So let's move into the chronemic stand of space. And this is called the polychronic. This is African time. And as you know, my story, my inner dance began with the words, it began in Africa. Okay, so Africa isn't just a continent, it's a dimension for me. So as mentioned, polychronic cultures is are systems where several or many things can happen at the same time. Let's say all at once. Everything everywhere all at once. All at once. In that sense, time is fluid. And when you set schedules in polychronic cultures, here, if you set a schedule in one of these places, people will be very frustrated if you make them wait, even for 30 minutes. But if you set a schedule in Thailand or maybe in Spain, I'm not sure anymore, people don't mind. If you're late for 30 minutes, they're just there, sitting there, sipping their coffee or their red wine. They're good. It's like, okay, I'm just watching the people. I'm just breathing in and out. People aren't so frustrated when there is unpunctuality. People are late. It's okay. So examples of polychronic cultures would be Latin America, and I do believe much of Latin America is shifting. South Asia. And it only spoke about South Asia because that was the first studied. Like the Indians were very, very studied by Edward Hall and anthropologists because they had access. Later on, it to be East Asia and um, Southeast Asia. Then you have the Mediterranean. So why do you go there? Why do you go to Turkey? Why do you go to Greece? It's because you are polychronizing your mind. As soon as literally you pass through the airport into immigration, as soon as you land, you get into the taxi, the train, the bus, you can already feel like I'm becoming more fluid. I land in Indonesia or the Philippines, like I can breathe more. There's something different in the matrix of time and space. The Native American cultures were the same. So you can imagine in Australia, the differentiation between the British and the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals were one of the most polychronic cultures, and they spoke hugely about dream time. For them, time is according to dream. Africa, of course, as mentioned, and the Arab culture is also very, very polychronic. Like the Middle East is a polychronic culturality. Now, sections of the world that are polychronic are viewing time in terms of natural rhythms of the earth and also the seasons, which tend to occur spontaneously or even sporadically. So one famous example of this that Hall mentions is in Alaska, in factories in Alaska. They would set the schedules or timing by blowing the whistle. And the Inuit tribal people couldn't make sense of that because the way the Inuits would schedule is they would determine their timings by the sea tides, high tide or low tide. For them, this is the clock. Is it going up or is it going down? This would determine our electromagnetic frequencies. Is it time to go into a sympathetic or a parasympathetic mode, a masculine or feminine? So business uh, dimensions importantly had to consider this. When let's say globalization hit China, hit Japan, they had to consider this when they were marketing to different audiences. Or when you have factories, let's say uh, uh, you're developing, let's say, microchips, or Levi's is producing their jeans in Bangladesh or Vietnam or the Philippines. The way they handle the workers, they had to understand how to conduct human resource development in order to indoctrinate people into the time clock. But that took like huge efforts on so many parts because of the polychronic people really, really hate clockworks in that work, in that sense. Okay, so let's do polychronic page 2 because there's more to it, as we have defined, like being able to do many things at the same time. In polychronic cultures, time with others or social time is regarded as an actual task, meaning it's one of the important works that you have to do. In monochronic cultures, that's something you need to do less of. Try to spend less time with others and just do your work. But befriending others and maintaining relationships is actual work, and it's a daily regimen. And there is huge focus on sustaining traditions, which is in a way also relationships. In other words, the community or the society is much, much more important than the individual. And when you then construct transactions or communications, you have to invest a lot more in trust building in polychronic spaces as opposed to monochronic spaces. In monochronic spaces, what you hold are clear contracts as agreements. In the chronemic, polychronic, before you sign anything, there has to be a clear human connection. There has to be clear trust building, and emotions can be charged. It's allowed to be expressed, as opposed to in monochronic cultures. Emotions aren't really so allowable. It doesn't have as much of a place in the workspace. And that means that is because in chronemic, in polyphonic cultures, we want to make sure that everyone's happy, as opposed to just the business owner or the boss is happy. There has to be a collective consensus. Okay, so here's where you see in energy communities there are different styles. You know, like let's say monochronic cultures would be more the still guru based setting, very industrial style. You know, the spiritual teacher, the pope or the master is the one we would follow, and that's the contract. In the polychronic space, like there are no teachers. It's the whole community that needs to arrive at a consensus, where everyone needs to be listened to through a trust building process. So when you open the space, we need to like waste time, and wasting time is productive. Often when you hear people say like, how are you doing? It's actually very difficult to answer this more and more. Like, okay, how do I answer this? But this doesn't mean anything in polychronic cultures. The meaning of this is purely to open the channel for information to flow through. The actual answer to how are you actually is not important. When people ask this, often they don't care. It's really just to connect to each other. Like the message isn't so dominant, as opposed to in monochronic cultures, the actual message needs to be on point. It needs to be quite clear. Emotions would be more important here, that people feel okay. So when you enter into the Korean, Chinese, the Filipino field, you need to say good morning. You need to open the space first, and then you start to enter into a okay, so I came extremely from this area, and I'll be honest with you, I am hugely monochronic. There's this, okay, here. I am hugely monochronic in my style of work now. I am partly German, American, Swiss, but I am able to enjoy my polychronicity, like my being Filipino allows me to access multiple contexts. And it also allows me code switching. So code switching is in linguistics. So let's say when you are speaking in German and suddenly you speak in African, not just the words, it's dimensionality. When you're able to code switch, it means that you're able to access the gifts of both monochronic and polychronic space. And I would say this has implications in the way you hold chronologies and simultaneities, the way you hold sequences and simultaneities. Okay, are you switching between songs? Are you using the noise app? Both of those do different things. Some of those are more polychronic, the style. Some of those are more monochronic, like one at a time. And polychronic would be all at once as a network. Being able to hold these different styles, orientations, also paradigms and philosophies allows you to code switch. You can speak to everyone, and you're able also to universalize. Everyone has time and space within them, so it's not good to favor one over the other. Okay, so let's move on. There's another concept within Edward Hall that I find extremely important, and it's called high-low context. More specifically, this is cultural communication. And I find this impact even more interesting than just the monochronic and polychronic differentiation. Okay, so let's start with a high context type of culture. And this doesn't just need to be a place in the world. This could be a personality type. So you could be in a low context culture, but you can also be very high context in a family or society. So in a high context, stay with me here because it's easy to get confused as to what high and low means. When we hear high context, it sometimes feels like this is about there being a richness of information. But paradoxically, high context cultures often exhibit indirect, verbal, but also nonverbal, verbal communication. So you remember we started this conversation as to what is clear and what is not clear. In high context cultures, people utilize gestures, and they're also able to read meaning indirectly. So high context cultures could be Latin Americans. The Japanese are very, very high context. The Koreans, the Chinese, the Filipinos are high context. In other words, people will not be explicit in terms of the rules of the culture. They won't tell you what is right or wrong. You have to be able to read it yourself. You have to belong. You have to immerse yourself. As opposed to, let's start a low context page here. It's very important to differentiate. So in low context cultures, communication messages needs to be explicit, particularly in words. You have to be very, very clear. If you're not saying it, then it's not meant. But if you're saying it, it means that you mean it. Okay, like in high context cultures, this is what I meant about when people say it, they don't actually mean it. There's something much deeper beyond the literal meaning of what they're saying that is much, much deeper, much, much more complex. All right. So these types of high context interactions belong to groups that share long histories. So you can see why this is the case. Let's compare this to, let's say, America, quite a new society. And we have all of these Poles, these Germans, these British people, these French, these Asians, these Africans, all coming to one nation. And because all these people did not exactly share a long conservative history and set of backgrounds, there had to be more clarity. Like messages need to be explicit so that conflicts can be resolved. But here, because people were able to share very, very long histories that were unbroken. Okay, there was continuity. Here, there is disruption. As soon as you move into immigration, and then you have to then apply for a visa, and then you have to like slowly indoctrinate while bringing your own culture. You need to then translate into all these myriads of cultures that are trying to enjoy the same space. There had to be an explicit, clear way you have to communicate. But here, because people can enjoy the nuances, this is what high context means. That's the high in the context. It's more ancient, long-term, like much older sense, as opposed to yeah. So here, as mentioned, like it's important that when you have a message to convey, you have to say it directly, person to person, and then person to message, and so on and so forth. What is said is meant, and what is not said is not meant. And it's because relationships are not born out of long-term, let's put short-term relationships. And this goes beyond family. We're talking about intercultural states of backgrounds and culturalities. Like in low context cultures, it's very, very common that sons and daughters leave home at a very young age. If you study high context cultures, you would see the Chinese and Filipinos actually still living with their mothers at the age of 50 or 60 or 40. And it's okay. In low context cultures, that is just not possible. So even within that more simple understanding, there has to be a more efficient way of exchanging words. And in that sense, even though it seems like it's valued, relationships aren't as important as that of individuality. The individual is much more prominent. It's more important that you take care of yourself before you take care of others. I mean, there are, huge relationalities in low context cultures, but it just is not the same as it would be in Japan or in China, where one places relationship over the ego or the identity. Okay, so if this doesn't seem true, it is because there is the translation work already happening, especially because of travel, emigration, and the internet. Yeah, so I think this is interesting. Okay, so this is the backdrop in terms of the beyond culture part. In terms of Edward Hall, I want to describe to you what this might mean from an inner dance perspective, and maybe we can go a little bit into hermeneutics. And then I really want to focus on hermeneutics during the next call, but I think it would be interesting to land this in a philosophical grounding. And we can just go deeper into hermeneutics in the next call, if possible. I want to go a little bit more into application today where inner dance is concerned. I also want to just have a conversation with you. I want to focus on beyond culture for today. Now, hermeneutics is the theory and philosophy of interpretation. Interpretation. How do we interpret meaning? How do we make meaning? And then how do we signify meaning? I have a keynote presentation. And without having to go through all the slides, I think we can go over just a few, just so we can save time, okay? Start with this. Where does hermeneutics come from? Like, what is the potency of that word? So the word Hermes, and a lot of people confuse hermeneutics when they study this within the spiritual community context. They think of the Hermetic tradition. It's not connected. It's a different set of views. Hermeneutics is etymologically coming from Hermes, the messenger of the gods in the Greek. In the Roman, as you know, he's called Mercury. So he wasn't really so much of a deity that held a stationary status. He was always just bridging the gaps. He was like the postal in the mythological. So Hermes somehow has to do with communication. Normally we'd see this in the blue, but I would see this in the green. And I want to explain why. Why does this hold the heart space, like in the inner dance process? How do we communicate? What does it mean to communicate, to share meaning across individuals in a group? And hermeneutics holds some really interesting pathways to that. Let's go into this. So what is interpretation? And let's see if this is important. No, that's important in the next call. I will go into this in a while. But before that, let's maybe look at these one at a time. Okay, what does it all mean? Why interpret? Why is that even important at all? Let's look at the history of interpretation, because this is where it becomes useful, and how does this reflect in terms of where we are at now. Okay, so hermeneutics was religious first. What does that mean? It is true that a kind of hermeneutics before the invention of the term was already happening in the antiquities. Okay, the Talmudic, the Aramaic. There was already an interested in how do you interpret sacred texts, especially. So as I said, hermeneutics began with religion first, and it was actually like all of a sudden. Hermeneutics came all of a sudden, out of necessity, because it was important. And I feel that this could be suddenness. Let's go back to okay, here. It's the transition from the suddenness of losing old patterns and then moving into new ones. What would be bridging is a hermeneutics inside people. So let's say, okay, I am able to reach into my baby state, my pure, unjudging, non-dual state, and I can approach this from a point of origin. How do you then develop things to become meaningful, not meaningless? Because if you stay in baby, things will be meaningless. But for there to be meaning again, coming from meaninglessness, shifting into meaningful states, a hermeneutics might be key. Okay, so you need to evolve to that point where you would also enact the starting point of hermeneutics, which, let's say, okay, a lot of you are coming from the spiritual context, from the religious. Where did hermeneutics begin? So prior to hermeneutics as a formal discipline, this was holding a lot of space in the Western philosophical tradition. So where there was a lack of systematicity, people would, let's say, read books, especially sacred texts, and a lot of the texts were coming from this, whether it be the Old Testament, the New Testament. A lot of philosophers were also coming from a religious backdrop. When people read the books, prior to hermeneutics, there was really no need for interpretation. When people weren't reading directly from the books, there was a mediation. There was a mediatory function religion played. So for instance, because people hadn't really developed an ability people weren't actually reading it. Okay, the book wasn't really widespread. This is prior to the Gutenberg invention of the printing press, German the German inventor of the printing press. The printing press has been in China even before the Gutenberg machine, but it didn't influence the world as the Gutenberg machine would. And the first book that got printed in the Gutenberg machine was also the Bible. Okay, because this is supposedly the most important text at that time, the 16th century. So you can see the sharp move here. So let's say people were dependent on meaning being spoken by the mediators. Like there was no need to interpret because you had the interpreters that you had to trust. You weren't actually allowed to think too much. The mediators were supposed to interpret things for you. So whether that be the Pope, whether that be the priest, the bishop, even the nuns, the female versions of these weren't really allowed to intercede as much as the men. There was not really a need for hermeneutics during this time. So you can see the critical moment that when people started to read, they were suddenly shocked at the lack of a system. So let's say they would read this, and okay, there's all these parables and there's these symbolisms. I don't know what they mean. They're very cryptic. They're very mysterious. I don't get it. I don't understand what they mean. I was not given the skill set, because here I am learning to read for the first time. I'm going to the first variation of what would eventually be called the school, and I don't have an understanding of what does it mean, and then how do I know if it's good or bad, right or wrong. So what changed that was the work of Martin Luther, another German speaking force, where the Reformation period of Protestantism, don't know if there should be a T there. Protestant Reformation. Okay, let's please, because I don't know how to spell it. Protestant Reformationism did something very huge in the European formal tradition. We're not going to stick to this because a lot of the what begins in hermeneutics would later shift into structuralism, and what begins in religion would later on be applied to literature. It would be applied to politics. It would be applied to economics, and so on and so forth. Like a lot of what began in religion would later be applied to how do we read art? How do we read jurisprudence? How do we read economic textbooks in a way that would actually help us to understand? So in our line of work, we have to understand that the brain had to change through all this. Now, right now, a lot of you do know how to read, and we need to go into the inner dance construct. You are in fact shutting down temporarily the reading brain, even as you go back to early forms of dimensions, mental dimensions, where interpretation goes away. Okay, like you go into systems of non-interpretation, and that has a lot of benefits, but that will subject you to old, like coming from this, where these guys were holding like a lot of power, and if you're told, don't think, don't ask questions, a lot of that is actually coming from an old pre-hermeneutic space. So developing a systematicity is important somehow within the paradox of, okay, you're shutting down the reading brain, and take that up more in the blue and in the orange, how we are shutting down, what are the reading parts of the brain that we shut down in the journey, then how do we restart that even as we keep shutting it down. Okay, so you are recapitulating history in the sense And I wanted to go into the sharp, like all of a sudden transition point, because you are also in that, you're also transitioning from the new to the old and then to the ultra new. Because it is not true that you're just shutting down the reading brain, you are actually accelerating the reading brain, but you have to tap into the parts that are the non-reading parts. It could be more the speaking parts or the feeling parts or the touching parts or the music parts and so on and so forth. Um, that's what hermeneutics is. That's what it means. So if you find that this is important, then if we value this, then we would go into the epistemology of this. Like, what then is that system? What is then hermeneutics? If I see that, okay, I see that this is important, that all these people going into Instagram, Facebook, let's say we can't not mention TikTok. When you watch a TikTok video, what sort of interpretation is happening? Is it non-interpretive? There is a lot of spectacle happening in social media that actually removes us from a critical thinking process because of the it's like a magazine type format. It was Sesame Street that started that. Like, if I was to describe that, like Sesame Street realized that se- ses, uh, Sesame Street was one of the first media forms that understood that children don't have the attention span. They have ADD. They can't follow long, let's say a long hour-long lecture, 2 hours, or go to school. They can't follow long narratives. What they can follow would be segments. So when you think of TikTok, it's similar to Sesame Street, but it even shortened the segments all the more. Like Instagram shortens the segments so that the attention span of people would be far removed. What TikTok does, just like Instagram, is it creates ADD or ADHD brains. And when you listen to podcasts, when you go into the inner intensive, we deal with the healing of that by allowing people to pay longer attention. So it's similar that when you ask someone to lay down, there is this disruptive space that disallows continuity of thought. So people aren't able to hold long historicities. It becomes more untemporal, like you're able to let go of historicization. And that can be problematic in many ways when you see what that does to ego structures, particularly solipsism, which is the understanding that I am the only mind that exists in the world and I invalidate anyone who doesn't agree with me. So that's partly accelerated by the segmentization of information that social media is short messages in social media is accelerating in a way that's creating addiction and is affecting the memory centers of brains and minds. So if you were wanting to uphold energy states that can help to correct that, then there has to be adjustments that need to happen. Okay, I just wanted to put that up to clarify why hermeneutics is in fact going away. And that's what makes it partly more and more important. So let's go into the keynote. Okay, what else did I put here? Okay, so the hermeneutic principle follows initially like a circle. There's a hermeneutic circle, which could be explained either as relationship between the whole and the parts, or the message, the context in the text, or also the past and the future. There's also the relationship of the author and the text, or the reader and the text. It depends on who you're reading, which hermeneutic tradition you're taking up. So let's look at possible interpretations of interpretation within the inner dance context in this way. Let's say you're beyond Sesame Street now. You're older. Okay, Sesame Street is good. I love Big Bird. I don't actually remember the other ones. Like I remember that Cookie Monster. Okay, those are good. That held my attention when it was needed, like Big Bird and Cookie Monster. So I want to go beyond that street, that village that I grew up in. Like I'm ready now for something bigger. Okay, so let's look for starting points, a very, very simple starting points in hermeneutics that we would find useful. So parts and wholes would initially be the entry point. Like, what do we mean by this? And this would bring up the role of prejudice in, yeah, this might help bring us back into culturality. Now, let's start with hermeneutics circles within the reading process. So let's say, let's look for a book here. So let's go to my library. Where do I hide books? So let's say I'm looking for books here. Yeah, just doing things in random. Okay, I have let's say a journal article on Freud's dream interpretations. Okay, so this thing might be interesting, but it's made up of a whole bunch of words, sentences, like paragraphs. And when you look at these particular elements, they're referring to other journal articles, other important bodies of work, whether they be books or journal articles. And if I wanted to take this in all of a sudden, let's say, okay, I wanna lay down to this. I don't want to read it. I want to take it all in one at a time without having to think about it. I want it all of a sudden. I want it big. I want it fast. I don't want it slow. Then you throw it away. Say, okay, I don't need it. It's trash. It's like stupid. Uh, I don't believe in it. But if you found that this might be important, like how would you read it? What does reading actually do, and how does hermeneutics happen out of the reading enterprise? So there's too many words, and I could spend maybe a whole afternoon or an hour reading it. Where do I start? What I have is maybe here. Okay, I have this. Maybe I have like the look of this, and this already tells me something. Okay, let's say even I'm not looking at this yet. I'm looking at the whole page. What comes to you? So what comes to you is maybe some form of like wholeness. If this was a book, and let's say you were at the airport and you're shopping around for a book, and you look at the book, what do you see, and how do you know you might want to buy it? Let's say you have the title of the book. Let's say the title of the book is that, okay? And then there's a picture of a book. There's a picture of a book there. And then somehow you know what the book is about. You haven't really read all of the many, many things that would be outlined in a sequential sentence paragraph structure or by chapters. But what you have is the title, and what you have is the cover page, the art. And then what you have in the back of the book is maybe what's called usually like a blurb or a synopsis. And then underneath that, you might have these testimonials or these recommendations. And maybe even here it says, this is a bestseller, New York Times, this and that. And so what you're receiving is the gestalt, the big picture. What you're receiving is the whole. And inside you, that is a preconception. Okay, you can form an opinion even without reading this part right here. So that's how the hermeneutic circle happens. Okay, this is like a circle. And so initially you would read the whole, and then that would be a combinatory set of elements that's formed by your prejudices. Okay, what do you know about the general sense of looking at this? Okay, you know what this means. I'm oversimplifying. The title is probably a lot more. I don't think you enter a bookstore and then say, oh, what a nice book. It says that. It looks like that. There's so many books probably vying for your attention. It would be more interesting and justifiable for you to pay money to get that. Um, so you decided to buy it because based on your prejudice and your whatever the environment speaks about that body of work. You say you value that it's important, I'm gonna buy it and I'm gonna read it. So let's say you start reading, let's go back to that. As you fixate from word to word, starts with let's say the, say the baby that ate some or drank some milk or something like that. Hermeneutic circle happens that as you have this uh, precondition. Oh, don't do that, please. These preconditioned wholeness formed by your own prejudice and what you have observed from what the book has to tell you in the beginning, what you have available, having not yet spent the time to look at that, then as you read word per word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter, you will then start to understand the whole more and more, even as you take in each part. Do you understand how that's a circle? You can only understand the whole by taking in more and more of the parts. And the more parts you're able to take in, the more wholeness you're able to take in. So that would hold some kind of circularity, whatever directionality that would entail. That's how interpretation happens, right? So in our coursework, for example, as you take in like the red, all of these things that we've gone over, there's nothing in the red because I came into this app um, during orange and yellow. So let's say as you keep absorbing all of these different information, written and the things spoken, you're taking it into your body. Firstly, let's say you entered into this because you wanted to understand this thing. Okay, what does that have to tell me? And then when you open that up, you have this curriculum that's mandalic by nature. You have the colors. You're studying the anthropological, the neurological, the linguistic, the psychological, the philosophical, the and so on and so forth, the musical and so on and so forth. The more you understand a one particular part, the more you understand the entire thing. And this especially becomes interesting within our framework because we deal with holographic or holonic principle where we're very careful that as we study any single part, it needs to be relational to the whole thing. This is not always the case when you go to school, when you read any book. It's very easy to absorb a part, but is it relatable to a wholeness? Okay, this is what we are studying, not just in particularity, but we're studying how study itself happens. So the parts aren't actually as important, or the whole isn't as important. What's important would be the arrows. It would be the transition, the journey between the whole. So interpretation is the circularity itself. Uh, Circularity, like what you're absorbing, isn't so much important as the message unto itself. What is important is the process. It's the transformation that's happening in your brain that's activating the gestalt areas of the brain. That could be called maybe the temporoparietal junction, the posterior parietal cortex. So here, you hear me. Okay, he's talking about parts again, but those parts don't matter. Those will come later. What's important is what's the whole sense, what's the gist or the gestalt that he's saying. He's saying, okay, what he's saying is that there are parts of the brain that establishes the whole. When you try to remember that, okay, I want to learn the temporoparietal junction, then you would then invest another brain part. That would be more the hippocampus. That could be the prefrontal cortex. That could be the entorhinal cortex. But when you're establishing this, you would be, in fact, activating more the default mode network, or let's say the like N3 stage, the slow wave sleep, where you're converting like a short-term memories, where the parts are now integrating into the whole, okay, the black hole or the white hole, depending on how you're looking at it. So that's how hermeneutic circle is achieved. And when you perceive this from much larger sense, to borrow something from Roman Jakobson, he authored this particular space called the six functions of language. This six functions of language. And this could bring about some conversation in culturality. So the six functions would be, let's use the simple terms, it would be the sender, the receiver. So still this looks at the transmission type thing. There would be the message, but there would also be the context the message unfolds around, the environment. There would be the code that establishes the common rules and vocabularies that allows us to exchange these at all. And then there would also be the channel to carry these messages across. So just to keep them all see, we could just say this is content even, just so we're seeing things all at once. So depending on what feels more important or dominant in the communication, like this is the ego. It's like I am the most important. I don't actually care about what I'm saying. What's important is I get the attention, I get the money, I get the power, I get the status. That would be more a monochronic style. That would be more a low context style. If you were to shift into a high context polychronic space, a more African, more Chinese, a more Filipino space, then what's important is the one who's receiving the message, the one who can hear you. You know, like when I post a message, it's not my picture, it's not my image that's shining. Like I'm allowing the other to be dominant rather than the self. So if it's not just going to be about the people, you know, subjects, if it becomes more the information, which is what's inside the people or around the people, then it's either you focus more on the content or the information. That could be quite valuable. On a higher level, when you put all the content into a mixture, an admixture, you might arrive at the context. And you try to look for the space that holds all contexts. That would be code. That would be a dimension. That would be a much deeper space of inception time. Okay, that would be like a lot bigger. So let's say the context would be like systems. And the more systems you learn, the code would be the system of all systems. The code is the meta system. And then the channel, the dimension that you choose to carry this would be also a choice point. Do you speak about this in a verbal fashion? Do you go into the nonverbal where people can also digest the things that they're not able to handle, like in words? So there is multidimensionality in the work that you do. So of course you will have to use words at one point. And then of course you will also need to let go of words and use sound and music and so on and so forth. So what makes this operationally and functionally important in the inner dance process is when we bring up this particular text, which is huge in the orange. And if you don't have access to this particular essay by Roman Jakobson, I suggest that you ask us for access. Otherwise, you can just Google. So you can write this down. And I would love for you to read this because this in particular helps us to understand the inner danceness of this. That when you get someone to lay down, you would access brain and autonomic nervous system and endocrine system and limbic system and neurocortical activity that would facilitate these parts. Either you're facilitating with the ego or the other, or like the informational context could also even be emotional, which is limbic, or it could be whole brain system, or it could be like the dimensional system. You can turn these on in very, very extreme ways. And so when we went into the orange, we were studying aphasia as a structuralist space, not just epilepsy. Epilepsy would be key in understanding how we activate the brain differently, either in localized or generalized views. But aphasia was quite interesting when people were going into light language, going into maybe different types of spiritual psychoses. The Jacobson essay, like this in particular, reveals the differentiations between time and space inside people's spiritual experiences. So without having to go through all of these, let's go into hermeneutics in this and look like peruse what is this really trying to say anyway, what makes this important. But while we have this time together, how do you read this in a way? Okay, so let's look at language from a speech level space, and this will help us go deeper into blue, particularly where context and code is key. This is like actually old. I don't think I can erase this. This is something I wrote like in my other device. I can't, but I'm glad I was able to highlight these because this would be interesting. So what is happening when we are communicating? What is the twofold character of language? And how do we apply this in phronemics? Okay. How do you apply this in the monochronization, monochronic or polychronic space? In other words, how do you make African or Germans of people? How do you either derive a French Canadian or English Canadian experience out of a body? Firstly, we want to ask, how does language work? How does language work? All right, so this would maybe be an early shift into the blue. And green is a combination of yellow and blue in many ways, so it's okay to go into the blue. So no, it's like negotiating what's the best way. So I've done this so many times, time and space. This is structuralism. So in space, we undergo a selection process, selecting the right words. And then we'll look at the essay and how this can be seen more clearly. And when you select the right words, you would tend to combine those in a chronology or in a sequence. Okay, that we're always doing that. I think to go deeper into what this looks like from an interesting chronemics, I want to look at the Aboriginal Australian way of conducting the song lines. This is actually so beautiful. Like Aboriginal Australians didn't really need geographical maps. This is so playlisting. What the Aboriginal Australians would do is they would understand that, let's say this is a big map, let's say of Australia, and each region divided into the tribal communities, the groups that would be living there. These regions would be mapped out according to the song or the vibration or the music that evolved out of that exact ecosystem spoken by the land itself. Okay, like this would have its own sound, and this would have its own sound. So the Aboriginal Australians knew exactly where they were because when the song changed from region to region, then they would know they're in another territory. They would know where they're at because of the vibration or the frequencies that would be dominant in that space. Isn't that beautiful? And isn't that likened to what we're doing? You know, we're navigating across the space according to the song lines. So what we're doing is we're in fact chronologizing and then deconstructing the chronology. Like the one conducting the playlist can access the song lines, which exists in dream time, but your ability to change the order, very light language, very Yoda in Star Wars. You're able to change the rules that grammaticalizes. Grammar contains the rules that allows you to be understood. Like one thing needs to follow each other in close contiguity. Like an article, a noun, a verb, preposition, and adverb. You need to follow the rules, otherwise you're becoming Yoda. So that's how selection and combination works. And I may have spoken about this in previous Zoom calls, but I really would love for you to understand how there is a phonemics here, to understand that your culture has a more dominant spatial or temporal way of accessing your language functions, that you're either more sender based, you're more context or content or code or channel based. And this is to say that when you ask someone to lay down, depending on the playlisting style that you're using, you might make someone more Asian or more African, or you might make someone more German or Swiss or American, depending on the style. We would read the text just to be able to understand that. So let's clean up and let's read the text here. So what happens in a communication? The speaker selects words and combines them into sentences according to the syntactic system of the language he is using. Okay. So there is word selection initially that happens. So actually this is wrong. This is what happens in code. What happens in code is selection. So what you have in space is a vocabulary of your semantic units, normally called words. Like how many words do you know? So when you're speaking, and speaking is a way of thinking, it's a way of organizing information across space and time, you have to select the right words that would convey the meaning that you want to put across. So after you do that, you need to move here. So going back to this, what you then do, okay, this is what you did, but prior to that, you must have done that from the lexical storehouse. This is the ocean of words, which is something you need to hold in commonality. You need to share that, otherwise you're not going to understand each other if you're just making up your words into made up sentences. So you see how selection and combination works. That's how we start. Uh, you know, so you see why vocabulary is here in space and grammar exists in time, because grammar is how you combine following the rules. Vocabulary would be more aesthetic. There is no right or wrong. There might be more beautiful and ugly in vocabularization. Grammaticalization doesn't care about beauty. It cares about rules. One is more artistic, one is more mathematical or algorithmic. Okay, so why this is important is when people are laying down in the journey, when we disrupt the brain through the playlisting style, there is chronemics there already. There is a breaking down of either the polychronic and high context inside people. This is where you can disrupt the Asian, or you can disrupt the German, the monochronic in people's brains, depending on the style. Don't try to understand this in one go. Take your time, study this for today, for weeks, for months, or for a year, because it really runs deep, and it's actually enjoyable and worth it to address this in the long term, because what is changing is not just you, it's not just your brain. What's changing are collections of brains and nervous systems. So it's worth it to understand. So aphasia is only being used here, the momentary losing of one's language and one's mind, because we can see the structures. We can see the structural of what is normally astructural, what looks like a spiritual experience. If you wanted to understand a science, it's when you break things apart, break things down, that you can dissect things. You can see the structure that is there. You can see what is there when we see what is lost. Because when something is lost, you can see what is left. Okay, so here, when people damage the process that does selection, what is retained is the process that allows for combination. And for some people who damage what allows combination, the selection is left. So let's look at the text, for example, here. So one, say the first disorder, the first aphasia, say the first inner dance or the first light language would be called the similarity disorder. So when you damage, either in a spiritual or accident situation, people might experience a similarity disorder. So what is that like? Let's look for sections here that would be interesting. There's one in particular. So here there's a particular patient who, and I've seen this in participants in trainings, not as prominent, but there's something like it. So this patient is trying to utter this word like knife. And this is something you would select. Okay, I want to choose something in my mind that says it's going to cut, it's going to slice, it's going to dice. So the word normally that categorizes that function is the knife. Now, for people who have that kind of aphasia, they can't say that word. They actually have it in their lexicon, but they can't say it. They destroyed the selection function. So what they would say is, it's a pencil sharpener, that's an apple parer, that's a bread knife. They could say knife, but it has to be in conjunction with something else. Knife and fork. There's a need to, an intense and almost obsessive need to contextualize the word, but the code function is damaged. So they're not able to say it in one word. They're not able to name it in a simple way. There's a need to contextualize. So in a similarity disorder, which is here, which is a selection disorder, you select from similar possibilities. What do I mean by that? So let's say I want to express like energy. And when I get tired of that, I have another option. And then I have another option. I have like the universe, I have like Shakti, I have like Holy Spirit, I have like life force, I have like this and that. They all mean the same thing in that lexical storehouse. So that's kind of ego or monochronic, in a way that if you have ego, you need to be able to make definitive choices. If you lose ego, you actually lose the power to name or define or to centralize meaning in a particular way. I mean, when you think of ego, let's say this is your name. Say your name is that. Okay, this is me. But underneath all that, if you reach that in within a polychronic space, you're not like that three-letter word. You're like this experience and all that context and so on and so forth. You're not able to capitalize, like you say a big B or I'm Bob. No, you're not Bob. You are actually the context that allows Bob to be what he or she is. So it is possible to disrupt the ego. So that's the good thing. That's one of the things that we're doing. But I really want to show you that this is observed within a scientific space, that you don't need to just keep explaining this in generalization. There is something very hard science that one can study and do experimentations on And okay, like how does this happen? This happens usually in the sequential music because of the basal ganglia dopamine system. uh what happens is disrupt, because you're using time, you can make people go spacey, like intensely spacey. uh yeah, it's hard to explain, but that's a general explanation, if in case you're interested in that explanation. So that's a similarity aphasia, one of two types. Okay, that's just one example. If you read this, then you might find some of the other cases interesting. Here's another example, like bachelor. You know, I know what a bachelor means, but I can't say it. It's just an unmarried man. You're contextualizing. You're over explaining. You could just go straight to the point. You could say, I'm being journal about it. I'm just going to go straight to the point. It's a bachelor. But if you want to become more Spanish about it and you want to take more time, I want to take my time and go through all the choices because I'm very conscious of the environment and not coming from my egoic intentionality. Then you would go through all the choices in a very slow and messy way. Okay, that's what that means. So when people do go into the process, that would eradicate ego, but if left alone, it would actually inflate ego later on, because there will be a rebound or a rubber band. What do you call this? A boomerang. It will boomerang unto oneself. There has to be some kind of balance. So here, this is, as we see, this is the opposite of ego. I mentioned Asian being a collective set of cultures where society is much more important than the individual. In this case, we would maybe damage the Asian part. You can see here, this makes people more Asian because when people lose the naming process, which is a way of choosing a right word, what is retained is the Asiatic here. Okay, like people are almost to a fault, like contextualizing things. I can't say the word knife. I can say bread knife. So it's more contextual, trying to be more aware of the space within the word, not the word itself. Here it would be the opposite. It's like damaging the combinatory part. Okay, if you keep laying down, that's a type of aphasia that would be. So this explains light language unto itself. Light language, as you can see, is the breaking down of rules, the breaking of grammar, where uh, the lexical combinations isn't happening word per word. It's happening like within the word. The phonemes, the words are now mixing up and going into all sorts of gibberish, baby talk, alien language, animal, this and that. That's the damage that's done in what do you call this? Let's name it. Beyond the similarity disorder, this is called the contiguity disorder. We'll take up the word contiguity. If this is new to you, it's like here's contiguity. When I say it will trigger the word is, because there's relationship. You remember, like a polychronic high context is very conscious of relationships between parts, between people. So here we see, it's not just about people; it's about the words. You're very empathic. You're very careful that the relationships are sustained. So here, if you damage that, the relationships get muddled up and everything starts to interrelate with each other in sense not make does not hit. Okay, you yodify the sentence structure, the lexical structure in a way that's like freed up. Okay, so that's got a name. That's called contiguity disorder. So if you read this text, you would begin to understand what that means. It's like a word heap. When people describe, for example, Donald Trump, when he does his speeches, he creates like a word salad. So he has a contiguity disorder where he doesn't really arrive at like a clear point. He likes to mix up things. He calls it his weave. He thinks he's a really good weaver of words because he can make all these connections from things that are unrelated to each other, and he's not really arriving at a certain point. So anyway, he's doing a light language. Donald Trump is doing a kind of light language. Um, he's becoming African or Asian in that sense. He's losing his Americanism. So yeah, like I think we're trying to understand this. Okay, so here this is an interesting sentence. The kernel subject word. Okay, so it could be like that. Let's say that's the kernel subject in the book. In the similarity disorder, you know, this is the first one that goes away. You remember that example of the knife, the thing that allows the concept to be named, the signifier is the knife, okay, that holds the signified, which is whatever knife means. It's the first thing that goes away. In this disorder, it's saying that, okay, if in the similarity disorder, this is the first to fall out of the sentence. In contiguity disorder, it is paradoxically the least destructible. Okay, so in this aphasia, this is actually what doesn't go away. Like in some people who experience this aphasia, they're able to retain the naming process, but what is lost is the combination. They destroy the combination, so they can utter the point, the words, it's okay, but they lose the power to contextualize. I want to describe how this becomes more Asian or European, especially Northwestern European. For Asians, um, or like Spanish or Southern French or French Canadians, as we see, like channel is more important for some people. It's like, let's say I want to open a space, so I'm just gonna start a conversation, like how's the weather? How are you doing? What's up? You know, what's up? You know, what is that? Like what's up? What's going up? Whatever that means I don't want to hear what's going down. Okay, what's up? Do you actually care? I have a lot of friends who like to ask me that, and before I've even like finished my sentence, they're already asking another question because they're really eager to open the channel, but they're not actually interested in the content of what I have to say. They're not interested in the context. Maybe they're interested in the code somehow, but they're really just wanting to have a relationship. They want to get to know me as a person, which does hold context in code, like in general. But you know, maybe because they're using me as a projection and a device for their own well-being, then they're really just opening the channel. So Asiatics are very conscious of the channel. Um because relationships are dimensionally channel based. Because we're not very much output based. We're not goal directed. We're not interested in the point because that's something coming out of places in the world that are seasonal, that are, you know, where a lot of wars have happened, that where food is not easy to grow. People need to arrive at the point. Like here, we live in the tropics. You know, there's like a lot of this, and people can relax. There's food everywhere, and we, you know, we don't die when we don't store food, and when we spend time outside, even if it's raining hard, we're not gonna die. We didn't develop our prefrontal cortex, which is prominent here. We didn't maybe even develop the Broca's area that's responsible for language production. Here, what we might have developed is the Wernicke's area, which is responsible for language comprehension, meaning we're not speakers, we're listeners more. So in many ways, you are conducting this work to open up these missing avenues, these arrested developmental spaces inside people's brains. If they're lacking the Asiatic, and many Westerners are becoming Asiatic, they're interested more in community as opposed to individualism. But because Asians lack an identity process, we didn't have the history that allowed us to access ego. We're also interested in becoming this, in becoming Swiss, in becoming German, becoming American. So this is a big reason why we're laying down. We are learning to contextualize ourselves. So I want to describe to you what happened to me a long time ago. Oh my God, it's 11, 12. It's a lot of time spent already. I was holding a lot of these globally, and I would be holding the space hugely, like doing so many trainings, so many sessions, day in, day out. But there were these different years where I just had to stop. I had to stop doing inner dance because I could see that it was doing stuff to my brain, my mind, and my body. So first stop was 2012, and then I also stopped in 2017. And I also stopped, yeah, like what led to the uncovering of my inner dance is like stopping in 2006. So the reason why I stopped was because I was experiencing the problematics here. It's either I was getting too spacey, meaning I wasn't clear, I wasn't able to name things, or I was becoming ultra sensitive. Here you have an emotional high, oversensitivity, like over contextualizing, also overly worrying about other people. Okay, like people pleasing, like not able to hold my own boundaries very well. So in these years, I saw problems with this. I also saw the tendencies towards this that would lead to this because I was losing parts of my language and my mind, and I knew that it was really important to hold some continuity and not just constant disruption. That's why I like concentrated on studying on this. And then what were the other problems? Yeah, like language, I really do need to make explicit, but something was happening to my language that I was really bothered with. I felt like unclear. And I described to you my culture where this, in fact, is the normal. And I'm tired of that. Like I needed a hermeneutics because I was tired of like power being spoken by the mediator, the one who holds more information, that then holds more power. So this was entirely the one that did it. So I'm still emerging from what I was doing since this year. So this is maybe 6 years, maybe going in 7 already. Is it? I'm not sure. It's like 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 4. Guys, 8 going in 9. I'm still recovering from that. So I had to stop. I said, I need to stop this. There's something happening in my space that's solipsism, solipsistic. It's the grand ego. It's like I don't care about what other people think. I'm not open to the thinking of others. So when I stopped, because I was listening to all these stories and it was getting really, really loopy, I had to make space for the the whole world around me. So here's what I did. I built a treehouse and I told people, could you please stop talking to me for a minute? I built a house in a tree and I really longed just to have silence. I really needed the personal space. And what was happening was my brain had lit up to such a degree that I was experiencing intense codes and contexts. And I had yet to find the right space to be able to organize my mind. So in Maya, there was a house called the Green. That's the name of the house. It's huge. It's like a very, very big workshop area that can fit maybe 30 people, 20 to 40, depending on what the people are doing. It's like all the people could go into chaos in the green, and like a hermeneutic circle could come about there. So I told people, okay, don't come here. I need to be quiet. In fact, like one of the main things that was happening here that I was really, really disturbed by was projections. I could see how symbols were going into archetypes, like the father, like the guru, there was an Oedipus project happening there as well. People were looking for the one that they could relate to, that also was pulling me into all these dynamics to do with family systems and structures that were very unclear. Like there were these entanglements, and I knew that I had to disentangle myself first if I was going to hold a healthy boundary that could allow me to be with like others. So that was my project. It was the green project. It's partly orange, partly indigo. So I created this space for myself, and I've been studying all these different points. Okay, whatever the map is, like anthropology would have been studying this. How is this changing? I was studying that. I was studying the mind. I was studying like music, studying time and space. Going into the structure of consciousness as it unravels through time and space. Studying language as it was getting far removed from its normality, its normal space. And basically, I had all these like books, and I had all these science articles, these pages, thousands of them. I think I bought like 20 reams of paper. I don't know if you know what a ream is. It's like, when you buy paper and it comes in its bulk form in the bookstore, and there's maybe 500 pages there. And I had a printer in Maya running in solar, and I printed like all these pages. I had all these books, I had all these audiobooks, I had these articles coming from Wikipedia and from journals, so on and so forth. And what I did was I placed them all here in the middle. It's like, okay, normally when you consider the meditation, here I did have some books, but I was more in the silence of meditating everything that I had absorbed my whole life. But because of the buildup, I wanted to be clear. I didn't want to just deconstruct from my personal knowledge. I wanted to stay true to what this had to say, which I had absorbed over and over again. And that's traveling across the world. So what I did was I took the Wikipedia of the world, and I converged that like in the middle. Basically, like I was mirroring what is happening inside my own mind. And I was very conscious that this is also the mind of the planet, Mother Gaia, the noosphere, or the global village. All of the experiences that ever happened also mirrored inside my own. And with that, you know what I did? I rearranged all of my concepts that were also global concepts. Everything that I knew I was interested in since a child that belonged to all of these wisdom structures. I took the time. I said, I'm going to stop everything. And what does it mean to rearrange your head, like your mind, your brain space? So because this is the process, the dance, my movement across putting like okay, ontology would be there, and epistemology would be there, and so on and so forth. When you then open the website, I have been arranging the concepts of the world that are my concepts and the concepts of everyone else in this is the green space. This is the hermeneutic space. It's still the same space. I'm still there in the green space, actually arranging the whole and the parts, because I had activated the electricity brain, the super brain. I'm putting it to use in a way that maybe people don't have to put in the tons of hours that I put in, because if you can just integrate this within a model that would be interesting to a child that had been indoctrinated or initiated into the earth, if that baby, deserves to understand what it's doing here, what is the history, what is the, what is your ancestry, what is your legacy that that you deserve as a species, is embodied in one single person. So here's where the mind and the body are like hermeneutic with each other. Like this is kind of hard to put into words, but I literally arranged my mind. I arranged my mind in an active approach, meaning the physicality of it. Like I treated like my mind is one room, and that was called the green. And moving the papers around, within the months, I would, okay, that no goes here. I'd had all these pages scattered across the space, and I was looking at, okay, how is my mind constructed at all? If my mind wasn't personal, if my mind was this, how is this structured together? So when people, lay down to the music, what they see is all these symbols, all these colors, all these shapes. For me, I don't see it that way. And even before this became a word in 2008 that got published in posters and whatnot, like even as a child, I'd already been, without laying down, like wondering as a philosopher, like what is the meaning? Like how do we make meaning? How do we signify meaning where it actually all comes together? It lands together in a seamless narrative of one story. Um, so that's what I did. That's what I did. When I stopped, I had a pathway where I knew there was a point where I could go into this. And because I belong to a collectivist society, like my brain being unclear yet multimodal, polychronic, and so on and so forth, I couldn't use my language prior to this whole thing. I couldn't speak. I couldn't understand what people are saying. It was only in this journey where I actually found a language that was coming from this. It is coming from this all the while, but it wasn't manifest. Deciding to invest in this that would eventually have its own image and identity that carries this to here, that has been my project. That is my gift. Coming from my entire history, it makes sense to me rather than a projection. It's a project. And if I was to assist people in discovering their colors, like accessing the global brain, that would be my service. That would be my passion. I'm interested in how that would also happen in the brains of other people. So you can, yeah, it's like you can see where the culturality. I don't have to jump at it. Sorry. Uh, um, high and low context. Then where is this? Low context belongs here. It is the ultimate circle. High sensitivity, high emotions, but at the same time still accessing your Germanness, your Hegelian, your Kantian traditions, your the history that was able to, let's say, from music, make the Mozart, the Beethovens, the Chopins, the Bachs, that were really able to, at the height of the tradition of literacy prior to the internet, the level of genius that we had arrived at, we deserve still. But we need to borrow something from the hermeneutic line, even as we're losing it. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to stop talking here because that's my introduction to the green. And I'm leaving the Palawan today. So I have to pack at one point. Not yet. No, like we have to go to the bank and we have to go to the lawyer for some meetings. It's just interesting. It's weird. Uh, but do you understand now what is hermeneutics? What is the green? Do you kind of get what I've been going through as well? Do you empathize with what it means to have been a pie, to have been exploding in so many stories and subjectivities, trying to find a stability. How do I see the connections everywhere? It needs to be matching. It needs to be code congruent. Like it was the only way, and it was a struggle. But the last years have been some of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, and I feel really great to be able to share this in this way. Like closing a 12-month conversation has been a blessing for me because I've always been trying to bring up these loose topics. And people are like, well, what? Okay. So going back to the colors now in this last 3 months has been quite good. Okay. So questions, sharings, insights, revelations, breakthroughs. I would love to hear this from all of you because we all belong to the same world built in colors. And I mentioned some of the cultures you guys are from. Excited to hear from you now.
I can try to add something onto this. Is regarding my process. I realized that I know it, but I've been studying nonstop in this intensive since 4 years now, and yeah, studying this way of like decomposing and recomposing like through the green also helps me to see that the intensive is a hermeneutic circle in unto itself. All the parts being the whole and explaining, contextualizing, and yes, the whole and understanding. And what is happening in my group, for instance, in Spain, is they had like kind of difficulties at one point to take in, to absorb all the knowledge. The second cycle was like kind of a transition for them because they were like, oh, it's a lot, and then something like happened, like they started to understand everything, entering into the third cycle. So it has to see with what you were saying. It's not about the content, is more about the process of learning. And this is what I've been like processing and learning and living since 4 years now also, because what is amazing in this way of learning that you are proposing and offering by with the community is that we have this space of continuity, to learn. And even if we are falling down, we are at the same time really learning and integrating, even if we don't have like the consciousness, or we are not aware of this deep process that is happening on the cellular level. It's happening. It's really happening. So through trust, for me, green is also trust. And it's really like the pure expression of trust. Through trust, we are able to find this space of surrendering to the process of learning, unlearning also. And it's something that is beyond your ego or your I, the I, the individual. It's in the body, and the body is changing a lot, the mind is changing a lot. And I see this evolution in everybody also. It's like every regions and southeast, everything like is like becoming one again. And also what I've noticed is like talking about history and historicity, about the industrial revolution. We are I think in a fifth industrial revolution with the technology. We had the fourth 10 years ago, 10 or 20 years ago. But now with the AI, with social media, something big is happening, and it's affecting also the bodies and the mind of the people. So I've been like, before to come to Thailand, I spent like 10 days in Paris. I've seen also my friends. They're really like successful people. They have a good career and all, but their kids, they are like super special kids with ADHD, they all talk about it. You know, it's a real thing that is happening in adults and in babies also. So I think inner dance is coming with this new way of learning through trust, through body, and through non-linearity, but with a structure and the order and the chaos that is emerging, that is rising up. So yeah, I think it's big. What will happen is big. And regarding the education, I'm really curious to see how we can create like inner dance schools or systems like that go beyond like only Asia, you know. So I'm curious to see it being applied in Europe also.
I want to share what my green structure looks like in case it inspires some of you. So thank you for sharing that. It really still contextualizes and brings high context to the systematicity that we're explaining here. It's like that needs to ground in life. How are we experiencing it? So the stories shared really help. So I don't live in that green space in Maya anymore, where I was in silence, not speaking to people, like studying. So let's say when I open up my workspace, it okay, like when you think of Wikipedia, normally there's no it's just wild. It's like, okay, what do I look at? It's just so much information. It's like millions upon millions of entries. Who has time to read all these? So when I open up my inner dance space, like here, I've only spent like 3 days on this actually. I just discovered that you can actually organize. I'll move more slowly. I've mirrored the website. So anytime I need to access this, like I have another app that would be important for reading my journals, the science-based journals. But in terms of rather than reading the website where we're still working on the wikification, I think it's really important that I organize my own wiki. I think everyone has a wiki, and that's called language. So what AI and current technology allows is, like in the past, for you to read an encyclopedia, it's quite linear. But with the digital, you can organize your own mind, like the things that are interesting for you and for what you're passionate about. Like for me, it's inner dance. So like now I can just arrange them into reading lists. So before today, actually no, this last night I created like a list in green. So to prepare for the green space, I would like open this up. So for example, as I'm listening to you, what comes to mind is this one. That's for me how hermeneutic brains work on. So you describe, for example, like in France, there are all of these children that are becoming more nonlinear. In other words, like rather than in school, they're becoming more nonlinear. So the section of that would be secondary orality, which is a concept given to us by Walter Ong. And basically how he describes the entry point of the internet. And back then there wasn't actually internet, there was just television and radio. There was a movement from the age of writing, the age of print and rationalism, back into primary orality, which is like the African space. So meaning moving into electricity, moving into this new technology, we're actually going back to our African or tribal brains. There's an Africanization in France, in a way. So it's actually amazing. So when I look at this is more the African brain as opposed to just rituals and tribes, right? It's we're able to tap into the beauty of the nonlinear in a way that's still able to access like a linearity, but in a nonlinear way. So This for me is amazing that I don't have to work with my printed pages. I can now go to Vietnam and still access the green space. You know what I mean, right? I'm hoping that facilitators and trainers are able to also organize their own wiki. Uh, in other words, in a way that's sometimes looking confusing and overwhelming, but when you are able to slow down, and because we're committed and we're interested, it's very meta. Because when we were in older forms of language, you can't organize your own mind. Trying to organize your books, okay, I'm really interested in reading this book. I would carry all these books when I travel. Who really gets to read those? Like, how many books do we carry when we go on vacations? We never read them. And like, for example, like in speech, you know how it is when you say something you didn't want to say, and then you're like at night in bed, like, why the fuck did I say that to that person? I hurt that person. What did they say about me? You can't edit what you said. But when you're typing things, you can slow down the thinking process, language being a thinking mode. And then you can write it down better. So when you're playlisting, you're actually time pressured in that station. Something inside of us knows that if I can slow down this playlisting process, I can create a narrative that is much, much more seamless. So before we took up the DAWs, we were on DJ Pro, we were stuck within time. And now that we're working with synthesizers, with Logic Pro, with Ableton, and with all these other tools, there's a secondary orality that is coming about. But in my inner dance inquiry, I'm actually interested in the secondary literacy. So if there's a Africanization that comes about from our going into literacy and book-based learning, going into the internet, becoming more African. We're actually going to become more ultra modern, more Mozart, jumping from the current set of intelligences. There's this multi AI authentic intelligence mode, but on the way to that, there's a tertiary orality. I don't know if you're following me, but there's a third orality that comes after the internet or AI. And for me, that's called inner dance. That's a return again to Africa, but coming from there's no difference anymore at that point. Did you raise your hand again? I think that maybe you had something
Yes,
interesting.
yes, just wanted to add something about the group and the wikification and the colors. Like my participant in the Spanish group, they were asking, some of them were asking, but this concept and this framework, where do I put it? Like in which color? So I, instead of saying them like this is and this is going here and there and blah blah, why don't you organize your own mandala? Because they have
It,
their own way of
yeah,
content.
perfect. It should be.
Yeah, exactly. The categorization is really important. So they are into this process now. And this week we will start to work also with the writing process of. I propose them like to write like some document, like a short document, like as if they were about to introduce inner dance into the hospitals or in prisons or in schools, so in different environments. So they are going to be writing down things. For me, it's really helping, like when you start to write your own, like inner dance. What is inner dance for me? How can I talk about inner dance in this context and this other context? So I think it's like a part of the reconstruction, and really growing up process like that is really important and is happening into everyone, I think.
It's going back to the yellow, this form of dialectic, where when you synthesize, there is a form of it. A lot of people would consider it to be outlining. They say you start with a blank piece of paper and you make a mess of the concepts. It seems relatable within a universe, within a concept, or a theme, and we should be able to mess things up in each mind in order to arrive at the the story or the narrative that completes that. And it can be very fulfilling to be able to do that. Um, Something inbuilt in the hermeneutic circle and also in the dialectic is the pressure. It belongs to the growth process. If the pressure isn't there, so we're always going to be time pressure. There's never actually going to be enough time. That's how we have constructed reality. So a synthesis can come about either from an a priori or a posteriori, like before knowing and after knowing. The conceptualization is always like in a circular loop. So some people, they're interested in, I want to see it before I see it. That's intuitive, but it's also a benefit to be able to see it after the fact, because there's something quite clear in being able to elucidate this in a careful, slow environment that's almost veering into being able to academize this to medical practitioners and so on and so forth. So I think we're merely paving the container now so people can start that work, becoming their own moms, dads, teachers, being able to self-teach themselves the fluidity of the colors. The reason why the colors hold a space because everyone around the world sees the colors. That's a shared system of interpretation because we're all exposed to the same earth. The color cones and the rods inside people's retina reflected in the visual cortex is shared. So even if there might be different interpretations, religious, political, cultural across the world, where would we meet? What can we invest in that's stable and doesn't just shop around for what is the better yoga, what is the better kundalini, and so on and so forth. You can see where the biological meets the psychological there, right? So the question there in the hermeneutic framing is like culturally, what can we agree on that's unchanging? But there would be like a strange notion later on that like when people move from trichromacy to tetrachromacy, there would even be colors that we haven't seen before. So we would move from the key of 7 to the key of 13 or the key of 12. It would be a whole different dimensionality that wouldn't use the format we're using as the seed of life, which is the the 7 colors. It would be with 12 petals around 7 colors to correspond to the 12 months, not the 7 days of the week. But we're not ready yet to go there. We have to stay within the current dimension. And so what I'm saying is people will be allowed to have different interpretations of what the red and the green and the yellow is. But in so doing, we would also want to have the commonality. This is what makes it hermeneutic. There has to be the in the next call, we will call this the fusion of horizons, the fusion of life worlds. There has to be the horizon merging between the self and the world so that we can be as creative as possible, but at the same time, we are linking with the world that we choose to be in now, that we're not invalidating, we're not creating conspiracy theories, but that we are stating that this is where we choose to be. We're not running away. We're not like fighting anymore. We are now in a post. We're done with the anger. We're done with the skepticism, the Cartesian doubt, and then we're moving into only then would we be in total trust, right? Because the meta narrative is being co-written by all cultures, made up of all individuals. That's the ultimate dream. Okay, so I think that should be it. We need to go. This is a great opening, and I hope we are able to go even deeper into this. It's just a starting point in the next call. So we'll suggest people to watch this through going to the second, and the second would be something we would ask you to watch after this first if you can't be there. Thank you for being here. It's a small group, but it's representing everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Kara.
you.
Have a
Yes.
safe travel and enjoy your
Okay.
time.
Have a good trip.
You.
Bye.
Okay, see you guys again.
See
Bye.
you.
Bye bye.